Public Health and Welfare Committee is now called to order. First up, do we have any bill introductions? Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 22 RS 2821, which is a change in some of the Chapter 65 laws. And then I have 22 RS 2814, again, that's 2814, which is a public health bill relating to vaccines.
Okay. So what we'll do, committee, we'll take the first one first. We won't take the second one first. We'll take the first one first, second one second on a vote. So we have a request for a bill introduction on RS 2821. Do we have any objections to this bill being introduced as a Public Health and Welfare Committee bill? Not seeing any. That bill is introduced. The second RS number is 2814. Do we have any objections to this one being introduced? Not seeing any. That bill is introduced. Ed, do you have a bill introduction?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do. My name is Ed Klump. I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Peace Officers Association. We have a bill request 22 RS 2954. 2954. This is a bill clarifying the statutes on how law enforcement DCF exchanges information in investigations. It's the culmination of a recommendation from the Joint Committee.
Committee, you've heard that request for a bill introduction for RS 2954. Are there any objections to this bill being introduced as a committee bill? Not seeing any. That bill is introduced.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee.
Do we have any further bill introductions? Okay, not seeing any. We will go right into our hearing on Senate Bill 276. We will open the hearing on this bill, and to give a bill explanation is from the Revisor's Office is Jenna Moyer. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Members of the committee, Jenna Moyer, Office of Revisor, Statutes. Senate Bill 276 would update the considerations for persons who are blind in regards to legal custody, residency, parenting time, child in need of care cases, adoption, foster care, and guardianship. The first section is mostly the findings of the legislature about discrimination and biases faced by blind individuals. Section 2 defines blindness as a central visual acuity of 20/200 or less in the better eye with use of a correcting lens. It also defines family foster home and supportive parenting services, which would be services that aid and support or assist a parent or prospective parent who's blind to effectively discharge parental responsibilities. And Section 3 says that any action brought under Article 22 or Article 27 of Chapter 23, which would be, Chapter 23 is the family law code, and so it would be for legal custody, residency, parenting time, or in a parentage action, that a parent's blindness would not serve as a basis for denial or restriction of legal custody, residency, or parenting time, but the court would have to make a special finding if they believe that the parent was not, that it was not in the best interest of the child for the child to be parented by the blind parent. And then in the later section on page 3, it has those same provisions for a licensure as a family foster home or for someone to be found a guardian of a child. So whether the parent or prospective parent is blind for legal custody or for having a foster home or for becoming a guardian, that their blindness could not be used as a denial as the sole reason why the parent would not be allowed to exercise those rights. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, do we have any questions on the bill? Okay, not seeing any. Jenna, thank you. Committee, now we will open up for proponents. Proponents, we do have quite a few wanting to testify, so if you could keep your testimony under 3 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated. We do have a full day of stuff to get through today. First up is Thomas Page, President, National Federation of the Blind. And proponents, we do actually have your testimony as well. So if you just want to give a brief overview, that would be great as well. Thank you. Thomas, welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Chairman Hildebrand and members of the committee. I think I'm finding the podium here. Good. We're very pleased that you are hearing our bill today and really appreciate your consideration of this. I have submitted my written testimony. The overview is that as president of a statewide organization such as National Federation of the Blind of Kansas, I have had a lot of opportunities to meet people who have run into these kind of problems. I am not a parent and I have not had to deal with this myself, but I have had, like I say, a lot of experience getting to meet others. I think something I could say that wasn't in my testimony is when we considered all the, if you want to call it hierarchy of needs of blind people in Kansas, this issue has been one that has come to us repetitively, and the leadership decided that really this was such a fundamental issue and so fundamental to the safety and security of blind people in Kansas that this should be something we really put all of our energy onto. Can I just ask if there's any kind of questions since time is short?
Thomas, if that's okay, we will hold for questions till all the proponents have had an opportunity to testify. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, sir. And I should mention, I don't know how the scheduling works. One of our Zooming attendees, Ms. Schlenker, is waiting to go to her pharmacology school class as soon as we're done. So if you could bump her up a little, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you and good morning.
Thomas, thank you. Committee, due to that development, we'll go ahead and deviate just a little bit from our proponent testimony. We'll go ahead and hear from Emily Schlenker. She's with us via WebEx. Emily, welcome to the committee.
All right, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me, Chairman Hildebrand and committee members. I have submitted my written testimony as well, so I will give you a brief overview of that. I live in Wichita in District 30, and I had a child in 2004. And I actually was so afraid as a blind parent of the potential greater scrutiny of hospital staff and social workers because of stories that I had heard from my blind peers who were also parents, that I actually considered the more dangerous option of having a home delivery. Now, I eventually did deliver in a hospital, and I felt very highly vigilant during that entire experience and was able to take my child home, most likely because I had a sighted partner who was the baby's father. And so I really didn't have any problems related to blind parenting until a few weeks postpartum, when I started to really have some mental health struggles. And I suspected that I was beginning to suffer from postpartum depression. And I was very, very afraid to seek any kind of mental health resources. And I remember sitting in my practitioner's office at my 6-week checkup and her asking me, are you crying a lot? How's your mental health? And I remember saying, it's manageable, which basically meant it's not great, but it's what I have to manage to keep myself and my child out of a system that can only see that I am proposing to parent as someone who has no eyesight. And I was a very successful blind parent, but I lived with the struggles of postpartum depression for about 3 years. Those are 3 years where I missed a lot. And I'm very grateful to have gotten through it, and I'm very lucky. And I know that there are a lot of blind parents out there who either didn't get to take their child home from the hospital or for whom something like postpartum depression did not resolve. And I don't want to see that happen. And if this bill passes, it will make a lot of us much more comfortable accessing the mental health and other resources that almost all parents need at some point. So I thank you for reading my testimony and for listening to me.
Emily, thank you for your testimony. Committee, our next proponent is Robert Tabor, First Vice President, National Federation of the Blind. Robert, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Senator Hildebrand. I had to have help up to the lectern today because I'm dealing with some very severe sciatica, unfortunately. But thank you for this opportunity, committee, to speak to you about this issue that's of great importance to us. I will be brief. As Shakespeare says, brevity is the soul of wit. In my testimony, I mention existing law as far as the ADA and as far as state statutes. The ADA does not specifically cover situations that are covered in Senate Bill 276, nor does it provide adequate procedural safeguards for parents who are at risk of losing their children strictly due to their blindness. It simply does not have adequate procedural safeguards in that area. I also cite in my testimony statute, specifically KSA 38-2201 C, subsections 1 and 2, but those seem to apply pretty strictly to the juvenile court child in need of care, or what they call SINC cases. It does not cover the scope and breadth of Senate Bill 276, adoption agencies, foster care agencies, hospitals, and so forth. Which this bill is quite comprehensive and very broad in its protections and coverages. Another concern that was raised is, well, is this going to hamstrung DCF Child Protective Services? Let me assure you, senators, that it will not. If, for example, a child abuse allegation is reported by a mandatory reporter, such as a school teacher or school nurse, then the state has a duty to investigate those allegations, and if they are found meritorious, then the state has authority to go ahead and intervene in the best interest of the child. Wish to assure you, senators, that Senate Bill 276 does, while it protects the rights of blind parents, it also preserves the best interest of the child as the gold standard of child care and well-being. You have my testimony. I would ask you to just give it very careful consideration, and thank you again for taking the time to hear us on this important matter to us.
Robert, thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, our next proponent is Luann Kibbe, Systems Advocacy Manager, Southeast Kansas Independent Living, and Luann is with us virtually. Luann, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Hildebrand and committee members. My name is Luann Kibbe, and I'm the Systems Advocacy Manager for Southeast Kansas Independent Living Resource Center. Parents are discriminated against by state and private agencies and courts by removing children from our homes based solely on our disabilities. Whether we have an intellectual developmental disability, mental health, blindness, deafness, or any other physical disability, it does happen quite often. Skill is seeing parents with all types of disabilities whose children have been taken from them through the years, new parents with intellectual developmental and or mental health disabilities whose babies are taken at birth at the hospital, parents who acquire a disability through an accident whose children are removed from their home. We had a mother with an acquired disability whose children were taken from her and given sole custody to her ex-husband that had past convictions of very deviant behavior charges. She had sole custody prior to her disability. We assisted her in getting legal representation, which after a long battle, she was determined the custodial parent. But these types of actions are so destructive and tear families apart, causing great harm to children and parents. So Skill supports Senate Bill 276, but we believe it must go beyond protecting parents who are blind. The state of Kansas needs to assure these protections cover a parent no matter what type of disability they have. We should have every opportunity to parent whether we need services and supports to do so or not. Many of us with disabilities have raised children just like those of you without disabilities. It just takes one person to start questioning our ability to parent when the barriers and discrimination begins. If amended, Senate Bill 276 will protect us from these types of discrimination. Thank you for allowing me to testify today, and I'd be happy to answer questions when appropriate.
Luann, thank you for your testimony. Committee, next, our proponent is Mike Burgess, Disability Rights Center of Kansas. Mike, welcome to the committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And as the chair said, I'm Mike Burgess, the Director of Policy and Outreach at the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. And as you've heard from some of the previous conferees, you've heard a number of examples that do touch on Kansas. In my testimony, which looks like this, I report the National Council on Disability, which is a nonpartisan agency that advises the president and there's various congressional appointments and others that fill in on it. They did an extensive report on this in 2012 titled Rocking the Cradle, Ensuring the Rights of Parents with Disabilities and Their Children. And in that testimony, it cites some of the more national statistics on this. And you can see individuals with parents that are blind are definitely in there, and as it applies to numerous other types of disabilities as well. So we are here very much to support Senate Bill 276 as written. If the committee were interested, we would very much support broadening it because the issue very much, I mean, it's very significant for parents that are blind, but it's also very significant for other types of disabilities. And so we would support broadening that to include all types of disabilities. And I know, I mean, one of the people I know who unfortunately wasn't able to make it here today, this type of situation has come up in her, with her family, and this bill would very much help in her situation as well. So again, it's a national problem, but there are also instances where this happens here in Kansas. So I think this bill would go a long way towards helping address that in a proactive way. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Mike, thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, our next proponent is Susan Tabor, a private citizen. Susan, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee, for hearing my testimony, which I've also submitted in writing. I am here in support of this bill. Whenever I think about this bill, I think of I practiced social work in the state of Kansas for a number of years. And one of the first cases that I had happened to be a young woman who was a blind mother. She had had several instances of her child being removed from her because of concerns about concerns that she might be neglecting the child. When I got the case, the worker was ready for severance, but I was not. The material I had received had showed me a lot of information from interviews with family members and neighbors, but not much from the mother herself. The severance was requested, and the judge chose to let the mother have a chance at counseling. We were able to identify some problems that she had, and were able to identify strategies to help resolve those problems. And she responded very well to therapy and was able to move on with her life, be true to the priorities she had set for herself, and her child was returned to her custody. I really would like to see a state in which this kind of thing doesn't happen again. In this particular case, there were some problems with how the case, how the assessment was done and how the material was documented, and it created some difficulties. And so that further complicated things. Language from this law in policy manuals and statute books would help more objectively guide the workers as they make case planning decisions and plan their interventions, thereby leading to more objective determinations and service delivery and service that's based on the actual problems rather than those created by fear and possible unconscious bias. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any later.
Susan, thank you for your testimony. Committee, our next proponent is Bruce Roberts, private citizen, and Bruce is with us virtually. Bruce, welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman,
Bruce, welcome to the committee.
and I'm very happy to be here this morning rather than tomorrow. Sounds like the weather's going to be, and those of you who have to stay, I'm sorry. Anyhow, when my grandson was born, back in November of 2019, I was very proud to be the new grandparent and made several trips up to the hospital with my son to see the little baby because he was in NICU for about a month. And I was proudly, using my cane to navigate the hallways and parking lots, which I was actually pretty new at using the cane because I'd kind of rejected using the cane for a while because I do have a certain amount of visual ability, but still within the realms of being legally blind. And the cane really helped me with confidence in my navigation, especially where there were steps and stuff like that. But as time progressed, and it was time for the child to be discharged, it was determined that the child was going to have to be put into foster care by DCF. I was the only family member able to step up and say, I would be glad to take the child, and my son really wanted that, so we could try to keep the child in the family. I was very happy to do that. It thrilled me, but then fear set in because of all the previous stories I had heard about parents having problems with being able to keep their children. And so in my efforts to alleviate any question or discussion, my following visits to the hospital as well as the overnight stay for observation that I was required to do to make sure that I knew how to take care of a child and everything, I just folded up my cane and hid it and put it in my pocket and did not use it. There was a lot of anxiety. As things turned out, it all turned out very well. I know I think I'm kind of rambling here just a little bit. I'm a little bit nervous here, but my written testimony kind of, lays it out in a much more precise way. But the end result was that everything has worked out really well for us. The child did have some issues with breathing due to acid reflux. We got over that. I was able to observe those things. Even being blind, I may not have been able to see when he, turned blue, whatever, but there's a lot of other things that go on with a child. All you have to do is be in tune to what the child is doing, and you can handle that. And that was one of the questions that one of the doctors grilled me on about whether I was going to be able to see that. And lo and behold, it happened to me. And But I am happy to report that today, this Hayden is 27 months old, learning a lot of words, walking around acting like he owns the house, and he's telling everybody else what to do. So we are a very happy family right now, but the adoption is still pending at this point. But I guess the gist of my story is that the anxiety I went through trying to hide my blindness so that I would not be scrutinized. With that, I will turn that over, and thank you very much for your time this morning.
Bruce, thank you for your testimony. Committee, our next proponent is Stephanie Sanford, a private citizen. Stephanie, welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much. You have my written testimony in front of you, but I think I want to let everyone else know why I'm here. I want to take you back to 1972, and I was 13 years old, and I snuck out, and tried to hear my mother and grandmother have a conversation. It was the day before my mom was to go to court for custody and a divorce hearing, and I heard my mom crying, saying, "What are we going to do if Bob wants the kids?" Bob was my dad. And my grandmother burst into sobs. It's the only time I ever remember hearing my grandmother cry. And she said, "We'll deal with that when it happens." I was 13 years old and I was angry. And I was upset. And it's the first time in my life I realized that my future was at stake. That after tomorrow, I may have to go with the parent who had walked out on a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 6-month-old child. And I would have to go with that parent simply because my mother was blind. You guys are very patient back here. I am very angry. It is 5 decades later. I'm no longer 13, but I am so angry and so frightened that any other child would ever have to experience this. We are 50 years later, and it still happens today. My mom was blind, she had mobility issues, and she had mental health concerns. And it would have been so easy just for that. And everyone in the court knew that all my father had to say was, "I want those kids," and my life would be completely different. I am angry. Shame on the state of Kansas that we have to stand here today, 5 decades. I have to stand here 5 decades later and say, you should not use disability of any kind as a determining factor on what makes a parent a parent. And there are thousands of children, grown and growing, who will be an army in this Capitol to let you know just how strong we are as children. We have survived. We've had an education like you will never understand. And it is time that we came into this decade, not 5 decades ago, not 10 decades ago, 2022, and let parents be parents. You have a lot of testimony from my family, and you'll be able to tell which testimony is from my mother. There's a long line of us that have grown because our parent was blind. Please do the right thing. Please let parents with disabilities be parents. Thank you.
Stephanie, thank you for your testimony. Committee, this does conclude our oral proponent testimony. I would draw your attention, there are 12 written-only testimonies. Do we have someone that's wanting to testify as a proponent?
My name is Susan Stansel.
And you have written testimony? Yeah. Okay.
But we came to speak. We won't take long.
Okay, we'll take one at a time. Since the lady was first with her hand up, we'll let the lady go first. If you would please restate your name. Ma'am, over to your right.
Okay, thank you.
Right there. If you'll just restate your name and
My name is Susan Stanzel. I'm 72 at this time. I have children, daughters who are 41, 37, and 35. I had a sighted husband when I had these children. We had the common problems of school, homework, cleaning bedrooms. You might ask, how did I know where the baby was? Well, back then I left I started or continued on the revolution of disposable diapers, and you could hear the plastic of those diapers as that child crawled around. It was pretty easy to figure it out. So that was not too much of a problem. My husband and I were full-time working people. I went back to work as an information technology specialist, otherwise known as a computer programmer for the Department of Agriculture. Each time after I had a child and was home for, 2 to 3 months, I had a lot of leave, and I enjoyed my time at home. The biggest compliment I could receive was last year during the pandemic when I was left alone with my 2 grandchildren, girl 4 and boy 2, from Tuesday morning until Thursday night because my daughter and son-in-law had work to do. And I became a widow in 2007, and we were indoors, sheltering at home. So this was my responsibility. But she gave me this responsibility willingly and asked me if I would please help her. The other grandmother lives in Nevada. I was the closest person here. I did. And I was very, very happy doing it. Just this weekend, the now 5-year-old granddaughter came over and we made brownies. Now we're having much more fun. So the blindness was, I can't say it wasn't ever a problem. It was. If I found a toy on the stairs, it was disappeared, gone. Everybody knew this was a fact of life. I thank you for letting me testify this morning. Thank you.
Susan, thank you for your testimony, and I think the committee wants to know when the next brownie day is.
What? I can't hear. What?
The committee wants to know when your next brownie day is.
Oh, all right. I'm ready. Now I had to add a hearing to my problems of disability. I have hearing aids now. That's what you get when you get older. These aren't all golden.
And sir, if you would mind just stating your name.
Yes, my name is Miles Anderson. I'm from Overland Park, and I am in Senate District 21. I'm a strong proponent of S-276, and blind people are normal people who happen not to see, and we're a cross-section of society, and, you know, I taught at a rehabilitation center for blind people from its founding in 1988 in Colorado. I know of several people, both in Minnesota, where I'm from originally, and in Colorado, who have been successful blind parents, but I also have seen problems with discrimination. And so I urge your support of this bill. Thank you very much. And I'll take any questions if you have any at any time. Thank you much.
Miles, thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, this does conclude our oral proponent. So we now have only 10 written, so draw your attention to that. Our agenda shows no opponents. Are there any opponents? Okay, not seeing any. And we have no neutral. Anybody neutral? Not seeing any. Committee, this does close the hearing on Senate Bill 276. Thank you, everybody, for coming and testifying today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Committee, before we go into our next agenda item, I do want to just give a little bit of a house cleaning note. Not knowing what the weather is going to be like, we're going to play everything by ear. If for some reason that we have to reschedule or cancel anything, please pay attention to any announcements on the floor. And please check your emails for any updates. And for those of you online, watch the calendar online to see if there's any changes, because it's highly likely that we're going to see some with the weather coming in. Unfortunately, our local weatherman says it might be not very good, so we'll see what happens. But I just want to let you guys know to make sure to pay attention to what's going on, because the agendas, future agendas will probably be affected. Committee? Now we are going to turn our attention to working a couple of bills. The first bill on our agenda is Senate Bill 200. And to give a bill recap, this is a bill that we had a hearing on last session. Jenna Moyer is going to give a recap on Senate Bill 200.
Oh, there we go. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jenna Moyer, Office of Revisor Statutes. Senate Bill 200 would expand the pharmacist's scope of practice to include point-of-care testing for several conditions that would include the flu, the streptococcus, which is strep throat, COVID-19, pre-exposure prophylaxis or post-exposure prophylaxis, which would be exposure to certain sexually transmitted infections, and additionally, a condition for which its diagnostic test is waived under the Federal Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments of 1988. And it would just allow for the pharmacist to test and both treat for those conditions. And there's a little bit more on the last page that are limits to that on page 3 that it could, or just, yeah, we'll just summarize it there. Yeah, just limits to the pharmacist, what they could prescribe and do.
Committee, do we have any questions for Jenna on the bill? Senator Steffen.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you help me understand line 19, page 1, or 18 and 19, this Federal Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments of 1988?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to have to look that up because I don't remember off the top of my head. There may be somebody in the audience who would have a better remembrance of that than I.
And I think we're going, well, we do have someone that wants to tackle this one. Mitch?
Mitch DePreez, Kansas Association Chain Drugstores, having helped work with the revisor's office originally when drafting it, I would just explain that is the authority that Kansas pharmacists are provided, just like Kansas patients, for these CLIA wave tests. That's they're so simple that they can be administered at home. There's a waiver process for a facility like a pharmacy to be authorized to administer these tests. So that's the basis. I wouldn't be able to go much in further depth at this time.
Well, please, can you give us the list of the tests that are waived?
They are lengthy and available online. Rather than listing them all in depth, I would just say that if necessary, we could follow up in the future.
Jenna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just looked it up, and on the CDC website, under the CLIA wave test, they would be things like ovulation tests, pregnancy tests, hemoglobin or blood glucose. They're fairly lengthy tests, but they are ones that have been approved by the FDA for home use and pose no risk to the patient.
All right. Committee, do we have any further questions on the bill draft? Not seeing any. I do know that we have a testimony from Susan John, Acting Executive Director. Is it written or?
I can rest on written or.
Okay, if you can make it brief. Okay, thank you.
My My name is Courtney Sisman, and I'm General Counsel of the Kansas State Board of Healing Arts. Thank you for the opportunity to briefly speak with you regarding Senate Bill 200. Kansas pharmacists are highly qualified and well-trained in the field of pharmacy, but the Board of Healing Arts believes it's the proper board to establish appropriate protocols for medical diagnosis and selection of therapy. So this bill is overly drafted, or as broad as drafted right now, and we would submit that current Kansas law properly protects patients in terms of physician oversight, which should remain unaltered. So.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. Do the laws currently allow for collaborative drug therapy and management where they bring physicians in and contract with a pharmacist to provide oversight and insight?
Yeah, yes, in KSA 651626A, there is, and I have in my written testimony what it outlines to, the collaborative drug therapy management is the pharmacist performs certain pharmaceutical-related patient care functions for a specific patient that have been delegated by the physician, and that happens through a collaborative practice agreement where once that agreement is established, those acts that are delegated are within the normal and customary specialty of the physician, and the physician is ensured that the pharmacist is properly trained.
Okay, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just looking at page 2, line 18, with regard to, well, actually 14 through 18, talks about the initiation of drugs, drug categories. That doesn't allow a pharmacist to initiate a new prescription, does it? Or would it?
I would probably defer to Board of Pharmacy on clarifying that question. As written, it does not require a new diagnosis. Sometimes there are standing orders from a physician that can be incorporated in the collaborative practice agreement.
So if a physician had already diagnosed and prescribed, they could go ahead, and obviously like a refill, but my concern is they can't initiate a new prescription on their own. This doesn't allow them to do that, does it?
They cannot initiate a new prescription, but as written, it says initiate therapy, which is broad, and so there would need to be some clarification there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Senator Stephan.
Chairman, well, I think it says in line 14I, the initiation of drugs. So I certainly read it that it would allow a pharmacist to start a new classification of medicines for an existing diagnosis.
All righty. Thank you for your testimony and answering questions for us. Committee, what is your pleasure on the bill? Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment.
Okay. Jenna, do you have a copy of that amendment? Okay. Senator Baumgartner, would you like to explain your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'll do a preliminary explanation, then I will allow Jenna to step in. But when we actually heard this bill, there was disagreement between basically the pharmacists and the Kansas Medical Society. Kansas pharmacists supported this legislation. KMS did not support. And at that time, you as chair and this committee did direct those groups to work together, to come back after you'd worked together. And I'm happy to say that the two groups have been working together, and that is why we have this amendment. What this amendment does is it very specifically narrows the scope so that that testing would be influenza, strep, and UTIs. It pulls out COVID, it pulls out pre-exposure prophylaxis as well as post-exposure prophylaxis, and it makes it very specific about what will and won't be done. And, the interesting thing is we did just receive testimony from Courtney, but I do not believe that the Board of Healing Arts participated in any manner last year. I don't believe, and I could be corrected, but I don't believe that the Board of Healing Arts worked with the Kansas Pharmacy Association or with KMS on this, though the two organizations that were charged to work together did in fact, and that's how we have this very drilled down, more narrow in focus, struck several of the areas that there were even questions on today, struck that out so that it would not be an issue of concern.
Do we have any questions, or Jenna, do you have anything to add, or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just clarify that one of those areas that was struck is lines 14 through 26 on page 2, and all of that language is just replaced, and this would add to the practice of pharmacy definition, and this is basically the scope of practice of a pharmacist, and instead of all of the lines 14 through 26, it would just allow for the initiation of therapy for those 3 conditions in section 1.
Do we have any questions on this? Senator Stephan.
Thank you. I've been concerned about this term statewide protocol. It did get narrowed down a bit in the amendment. Is statewide protocol defined anywhere, or can somebody define that for me? Because it certainly seems that statewide protocols create a one-voice narrative in regards to treatment, and that certainly has exasperated or exaggerated our difficulty in responding to COVID. So I think I would appreciate some clarification of statewide protocol.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start by sharing with the good senator that that's exactly why COVID was struck from that list. But I do know that our executive director from KMS has indicated that she'd be willing to answer that question.
Rochelle?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Rochelle Colombo, Executive Director of the Kansas Medical Society, and I appreciate the questions and I appreciate the explanation by Senator Baumgartner. This has been something that we just kind of came to agreement as we were working through a number of different things, and the statewide protocol is not defined in this amendment or in this language. It would defer it to the Drug Management Therapy Advisory Committee, and it is an area we believe could be better defined. I think that this amendment is a good start to put us in the right beginning place to start working together to remove our objections, but there are some terms we didn't quite get all the way defined in the interest of time and the fact that this was being worked on today. So we would like to see that defined as well as just a few other things, but have appreciated the good faith effort of the pharmacists to limit this. And the only other qualification I would say is it does broaden their scope to allow them to initiate treatment pursuant only to those protocols. And so then it goes through that joint committee. And so there's just some room, I think, for further definitions and work on that front.
Okay, not seeing any further questions on the amendment? No, I do. Senator Erickson, then Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question as I'm reading through this, and I'm sure there's a simple explanation. Why were lines 27 through 36 struck on page 2?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. That was already stricken last year. And so that's not new to the amendment. I will have to read it over, but it's nothing new. It was in the bill last year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe some, and just kind of dovetailing, following up on the statewide protocol during, I guess, I know we're removing COVID. Does this bill interact in any way with other bills we're working on with regard to, like 381, preventing pharmacies from using off-label drugs for COVID treatment? And
Jenna would probably be better to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This should not interact with that. The general understanding, the other use of that term statewide protocol in statutes comes from an opioid antagonist bill, which would be like the Narcan or whatever. And it would be, in that statute was explained to mean requirements for pharmacists to dispense those drugs. And so what I would take that to mean in subsection B is that this joint committee is going to come up with the guidelines and the requirements for issuing treatments for those medications. And under the terms of 381, pharmacists are not allowed to prescribe drugs that would be off-label use. So whatever this committee says that you use this, I'm trying to come up with the word, this specific medication to treat a UTI, this specific medication, this antibiotic to treat it, then that's what the pharmacist should do. There shouldn't, based upon my interpretation, it would not allow for off-label use of drugs to treat these unless it's specifically recommended by that committee.
I think I understand. Would KDHE be determining this protocol? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Senator Stefan.
Thank you. Well, again, we're statewide protocol and who's going to develop statewide protocols? Let's divide it open to anybody doing that. There's no boundaries within the amendment whatsoever as to who can or cannot participate or be a deciding factor in the definition of statewide protocol.
Chair, and thanks for the evening. We had a hearing on this. There's for regard to
An amendment possibly, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Alexandra Blasi, the Executive Director for the Kansas State Board of Pharmacy. You met me last year when we talked about the underlying bill. And this morning, I'd just like to remind you that we do work in partnership with our law enforcement KPI partners on this bill every year. We'd like to recommend an amendment, which I believe another committee member will be bringing. And that is really related to some precedent that was set several years ago by adding the drug Epidiolex to the Controlled Substance Act prospectively before the FDA had approved it to allow that drug to become available to patients in Kansas by prescription as soon as it was available to and approved by the FDA. And so the board would like to recommend amending the definition of marijuana to exempt all FDA-approved drugs with THC and CBD as the main active ingredient. We know that there is at least one drug in the pipeline that is likely to be approved between the 2022 and 2023 legislative sessions, and we hope that we could, in the state of Kansas, make this available for patients. This is pharmaceutical neutral, so the board stands and makes sure that this is a neutral bill that does not promote any particular product, but makes it available for any products that should become FDA approved. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Alexandra, thank you. Committee, do we have questions? Senator Gossage.
Can you answer the question, if the federal government or the FDA should decide that medical marijuana was approved, then that means that Kansas would automatically be approving that with this bill?
Senator, I believe the distinction is that the drug itself would be FDA approved through the FDA approval process. If the federal government just generally decided to deschedule marijuana, that would not make it FDA approved, so that would just change the other landscape. That would not be affected by this change.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Not seeing any. So we do have a technical amendment before we get to the other amendment. This is just changing the date because it was carried over from last year. It just changes it from 2020 to 2021, and that is the whole entirety of the amendment. So do we have any questions on the date change? Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a question. We have been doing this in all of our other committees, so I'm willing to move this amendment.
Okay. Have a motion by Senator Baumgartner, second by Senator O'Shea. Any questions on this amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. And do we have that other amendment? Senator Baumgartner.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do have that other amendment.
Okay. Would you like to just explain your amendment?
I'm happy to. Under the definition of marijuana, marijuana does not include, what it does is it adds item 3 on the list. And I think that you're going to find that perhaps on page, we don't have a page number, but it says drug products approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration. So it will be a drug product, not the plant, so not medical marijuana, but a drug product that has gone through that testing and approval process with the FDA.
Any discussion on this amendment? Okay, Senator Erickson.
Thank you. Just a quick question. So overall, this is prescribed by a doctor and dispensed through a pharmacy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's important to note, if we do not include that in this bill, then it would not be able to be prescribed in the state of Kansas until next year we update this legislation.
Yep. Okay. No further discussion. Would you like to move your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do move my amendment.
Second by Senator O'Shea. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out House Bill 22, Senate substitute for House Bill 2262 as amended favorably.
Have a motion by Senator Baumgartner, a second by Senator O'Shea to pass out Senate substitute for House Bill 2262 as amended favorably for passage. Not seeing any discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion's carried. We have two bills going to the floor. We are adjourned. Thank you.